Hello and welcome to Aussies Abroad, our weekly show where we support and connect Aussies around the world doing amazing things with inspirational stories of sport, business and entertainment. On this week's show, we're going to catch up with Red Bull's High Performance Director, Dr. Andy Walsh, who works with athletes and scientists and engineers and military and creatives all over the world doing incredible things. He's got a fascinating story to tell. Plus, Luke Elvey will bring us our latest Aussies Abroad golf wrap. Matt Keenan will wrap the Tour de France and preview our Aussie hopes for week 2. All that and more coming your way on Aussies Abroad. Welcome to the show, Corey McKernan, and great to see the world of sport finally starting to creep towards a little bit of normality with a few big events this week, the Tour de France and the US Open both getting underway.
It is, Chase. Very excited about the back end of the year now. If we've ever needed sport, we need it now. And as I mentioned, this back end of the year is going to be absolutely fantastic. We've got the NFL and the Premier League coming back. And you know what? If you know of any Aussies doing great things in sports, business and entertainment, drop us a line at our social channels.
On Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And for everything Aussies Abroad, in fact, aussiesabroad.tv, where you can watch us on YouTube, listen to our podcast and follow us on social media. Now, we're always adding to our list of Aussies to follow. So if there's people you'd like to log on and check out, join us on social media, particularly our Twitter feed, where we follow hundreds of Aussies doing incredible things around the world. Speaking of that, Aussies in action all over the place this week. So let's catch up and get up to date and get you up to speed with our Aussies Abroad news wrap. And we'll begin our Aussies Abroad news wrap this week with golf and another busy weekend for Aussie golfers. And joining us to wrap up all the action is our Aussies Abroad golf correspondent, Luke Elvey. Luke, welcome.
Jason, great to see you again, mate. I hear that there's been some lovely noise around Aussies Abroad. Congratulations.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate that. Let's start with the PGA Tour and obviously the race for the FedEx Cup. Give us the latest.
Yeah, well, it was a big weekend there at the BMW Championship. They played a golf course called Olympia Fields, which hosted the US Open in 2003. That was the one that Jim Furyk won. He beat Stephen Leaney by 3 shots there. And we had high hopes for a couple of Aussies going into this. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out the way we wanted. They're all battling for that top 30 position to get their way to the Tour Championships at Eastlake next week. And Adam Scott was beautifully positioned to play his way inside the top 30. Unfortunately, on the final day, he started tied third, just 2 shots back, and unfortunately stumbled down the stretch, played the last 4 holes 4 over, to not even end up being the top Aussie. Finished tied for 25th. Top Aussie honours went to Cam Smith, who confirmed he'd be going to Eastlake alongside Mark Leishman. And how's this? Mark Leishman, since the resuming of play on the PGA Tour in June, he's finished tied 40th as his best result in 8 starts, missed 4 cuts, including dead last this week. But he's guaranteed going to Eastlake, and that's great because he had a really good start to the year. As you remember, and I think you noted when we discussed that he had that win at Torrey Pines. Cam Smith had won at the Sony Open, and obviously Adam Scott had the win at Riviera. So it had been a really good start of the year for a lot of Aussies, and a few of them, or a couple of them at least, have been able to take it to the Tour Championship.
So only 2 have made it through to the top 30?
Only 2, and both of them aren't in great form either. They're going to start well back in the standings. The way that it's now been structured is your position in the top 30 determines what you start the week at, and minus 10 will be the starting point, which is where Dustin Johnson's going to start. And unfortunately, Mark Leishman's going to give 9 shots head start to DJ, who's obviously in great form, just finishing runner-up this week. A win the week before, and Cameron Smith starting at even par. So we won't expect too much from them this week, but I think just making it to that tournament's been a great indication of their seasons.
Moving on to the LPGA. How'd we go?
Well, it was a great week. Catherine Kirk, who'd had an outstanding or solid performance, I should say, at the AIG British Women's Open a fortnight ago, she stormed home with a tie for 7th this week, another top 10, so that's good for her. Race to the CME Globe, which is their like their FedEx Cup, if you will, and another stout performance by her. She's been over on the LPGA for over a decade plus, and really just aiming up week in, week out, or year in, year out, I should say. And there was another strong result on the Ladies European Tour. 19-year-old rookie, Steph Kirikou, who had won a tournament that was co-sanctioned in Australia, has only just recently turned pro. But she's already starting to make some waves over there and finished tie for fifth at the Czech tournament. So that's a great result for her. And one of another of those young rising Aussie stars that you should see some big stuff from in the years going forward.
What about on the men's Euro Tour?
Min Woo Lee was our best player. He's Min Ji Lee's brother, and I think we joked, with Gabby Ruffles a couple of weeks ago that Ryan's not even the best player in his family. But it's the same for Min Woo, because Min Ji, she almost won that Women's Open a couple of weeks ago. But he tied 11th. He had that victory at the Vic Open, which is co-sanctioned with the European Tour back before COVID struck. So he's 27th in the race to Dubai, that's a really good outcome for him. The only problem for those European Tour pros is that 2 of their 3 playoff events have just been cancelled this week, the one in Turkey and the one in South Africa that's played at Sun City. So the top 60 will just play in that season-ending event in Dubai, which was the week before the Australian PGA, but I'm hearing whispers that that's probably not going to go ahead now, given the restrictions in Australia and what's happening. But Wade Ormsby tied for 25th, which was not a bad result either. So a couple of good Aussie performances around the world.
And Curtis Luck coming off the back of his win on the Corn Ferry Tour. I noticed he didn't play on the weekend. Why was that?
It was an interesting decision by Curtis. I don't know exactly why he chose not to play, but rumour has it was the Corn Ferry Tour Championship. Because of his victory last week, he was already guaranteed a top 5 position in the Corn Ferry Tour playoffs, which guarantees him a spot at the US Open in a fortnight at Winged Foot. But because of COVID and everything that's happened in the world, no cards or full-time cards to the PGA Tour were up for grabs. So he knew he was going to go around on the Corn Ferry Tour again next season. So I think he's just decided to have a breather, freshen himself up and get ready for that US Open, which should be an absolute beauty at Winged Foot in a fortnight.
Makes a lot of sense. You out for a hit this week?
My word, mate, we're getting close to the end of summer over here, and
got to make the most of it.
As it is, so you got to make the most of it. And I'll be out during the week and having a good time. But feeling a bit for Adam Scott, who I know was dead keen to play his way to Eastlake. But that's the way it goes. That's golf, isn't it?
Luke, thanks for your time as always. We'll catch up with you again soon.
Pleasure, Jace.
Cycling, the world's most famous race is underway, and joining us as always to give us his latest on the world of cycling is our expert Matty Keenan, who's been burning the midnight oil for SBS. Matty, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. After the first couple of nights, I feel like a night shift worker. I've arrived home each night at 3:30, bed and asleep by around about 4:30, and then the kids roaming around the house by 7:30. It's challenging.
I was going to ask that. Last week you told us you were going cold turkey, which I thought was a very bold strategy. Are you rethinking?
Yeah, I'm going to buy more shares in coffee companies. It's keeping me fueled.
Let's get into the Tour de France update. We were hoping to see Caleb Ewan maybe in yellow after stage 1, but the cycling gods had other ideas.
Yeah, the Tour de France turned into a really good ice skating event on stage 1. It rained for the first time in, I think it was 3 months in Nice. So as a result of that, you get the accumulation of just oil, diesel, and grit on the roads that hasn't been washed away for so long. And when the rain fell, the roads really did turn into an ice rink. There were guys crashing when they were riding along a straight piece of road. It was extraordinary. Caleb was one of the guys who did crash. He ended up at 1.6 minutes behind the peloton. He had a teammate, John Degenkolb, do the chasing to help getting back. Caleb came back. I thought he had no chance of getting back. He ended up 19th on the stage. He was really disappointed. It was actually a pretty big performance by Caleb even to get back in contact. He's still got plenty of opportunities to win stages. And even going into that stage on Saturday night, I still thought that he was one of the outside favourites. But the next couple of days for the sprinters, I think optimistically, he will be one of the men to beat.
Logistically, how have the COVID restrictions and precautions been working out so far?
In terms of the bubble that the riders and the team management are operating in, when they're not actually racing, the bubble is working really well. The teams have one hotel each to themselves. Normally they share a hotel and they would share the kitchen area or the restaurants from the hotels. Now they've got one hotel. They don't use the kitchen from that hotel. They use their team trucks and their buses and so on. The time of the race where the riders are most exposed and they're out of the bubble is when they're racing. And we've seen it a couple of times with spectators really close by the side of the road and they're not wearing a mask. We've seen one rider, an Italian guy, Domenico Pozzovivo, he crashed on stage 1, not because of the slippery roads, because a spectator had his arm out trying to take a photo and it knocked Pozzovivo off. It's actually when they're racing, Jason, that they're outside the bubble more so than any other time. Fingers crossed that it all stays safe. The good news is that as of Monday, school holidays are over. The kids all go back to school. Everybody's back at work, sort of, even if they're working from home. So the crowds should be down. Not often we say that.
The women's one-day race, La Course, took place on Saturday. How did that pan out for our Aussies? And Amanda Spratt, who we were hopeful of, didn't get a start.
I was expecting Amanda Spratt to be a big factor. Unfortunately, she went to Switzerland. She was having a training camp in Switzerland on the course for the World Championships. The World Championships that have been cancelled from Switzerland. They're looking for a new home for that event. It's to be announced on the 2nd of September where the World Championships will be held.
Some exciting news. Speaking of something to look forward to, Michael Matthews, Bling Matthews, heading back to Mitchelton Scott, where he rode a course for 4 years and terminating his contract with Sunweb a year early. Is that a shock?
And yeah, it was, because Sunweb is a really good team. It's a team that does a great job at developing riders. And he's had some fantastic results there, including winning the green jersey at the Tour. He wasn't selected for the Tour de France this year, and I think that was the tipping point for Michael Matthews. He couldn't understand why they didn't select him. And to be honest, nor can I. I think they made the wrong decision. He could have challenged for the green jersey, in my opinion. But the good news is he's back on the Mitchelton Scott team, and that was a great announcement. And taking the voice of the people, that litmus test of taking a look at social media, for the Mitchelton Scott team, their social media pages throughout the tour, when you look at the amount of traffic that it's generated, and then you see the traffic that the announcement of Michael Matthews returning to the team has generated, he's getting 4 to 5 times more traffic, him going back to the team, than anything they're doing at the moment at the Tour de France. So it's a great result for the team.
And you can see why Mitchelton Scott has headed in the direction of having less Aussies on the team, or Aussies on their riding in their secondary and third tier tours as development. They've put together a world tour team they think can win, because you obviously need that, don't you, for financially to make sure that the team's sustainable going into the future. But to have that Aussie connection and an Aussie star up front, I think is really important for the identity of the team.
Particularly if it wants to attract an Australian sponsor. Does an Australian sponsor want to come on board and sponsor a British rider, Simon Yates, Adam Yates, who was good last night? He's leaving the team at the end of the year, but his twin brother Simon is still with the team. Is an Australian sponsor really going to throw all its resources behind Simon Yates and Esteban Chavez? Both good guys, but the Australian public is not going to fully buy into that story, but it will buy into the Michael Matthews story. You mentioned his nickname, the self-appointed nickname. He's not all that blingy, actually, in the way he conducts himself. He's really, really professional, but he does look a little bit blingy off the bike in terms of the jewellery that he wears, and that's good for the marketing of the team.
Looking ahead over the next few days for the Tour de France, what are you hoping for Caleb Ewan and Richie Porte, our two Australians?
What I'm hoping for and what might happen, I'm hoping that it's Richie that wins tomorrow night and it's Caleb that wins tonight. There's a chance for the sprinters tonight into Sisteron, and Caleb is a chance. Depends, like a lot of the sprinters now in the race, how injured he is from the crash that he was involved in on stage one. He will not die wondering, that's for sure, with Caleb Ewan. It's a slightly uphill finish, which suits Caleb, and I think he is one of the guys to beat. He's certainly amongst the top couple of favourites. Then on stage 4, we've got the first mountaintop finish, and Richie will be hoping to get a good result early. He looks pretty good so far. He was caught up behind a crash on stage 1, but doesn't appear to be injured. We'll find out on stage 4 just how good Richie is.
Matty, thanks again for your time. We're loving your coverage on SBS as always. Keep burning that midnight oil, and we look forward to talking to you next week on Aussies Abroad.
Thanks, Jason.
Let's talk motorsport now. And it was a great weekend for Aussie Daniel Ricciardo in the F1 at Spa. The Renault's really up and about this weekend, which made for a very pleasant change. Dan qualifying in 4th position. He basically sat 4th throughout the entire race. And look, if it had been 2 more laps, he possibly would have got his first podium of the season. He was mowing down Max Verstappen at the end, but in the end just ran out of laps. But a really pleasing and promising weekend for Daniel Ricciardo on what's been a pretty testing and trying year. In Formula 3, Aussie Oscar Piastri had a solid weekend. He finished 5th and 6th in his 2 races this weekend at Spa. He dropped a spot in race 2 after copping a 5-second time penalty towards the end of the race for exceeding track limits and gaining an advantage by doing so. So that knocked him back to 6th. He now sits 2nd in the championship, 7 points behind his teammate, American Logan Sargent. Fellow Aussie Jack Doohan actually registered the fastest time in practice, which was really pleasing signs for Jack, but he had two very frustrating races. He finished 12th and then copped a puncture in the Sunday race on the opening lap. To IndyCar, and Aussie Will Power started race one in St. Louis on pole on Saturday, but didn't have a fantastic afternoon. Things didn't go his way. He copped a puncture and eventually finished 17th. Had a much better day on Sunday, though. He actually led the race at one point before ultimately finishing third. He now sits 8th in the championship, which is being led by Kiwi Scott Dixon. While in NASCAR, another frustrating weekend for Aussie James Davison. He suffered a DNF at Daytona after he copped a puncture as well with 17 laps to run. To the World Game now, and Corey, well, Ali Carpenter only arrived at Lyon a couple of weeks ago, but she's already got her hands on a couple of pieces of silverware.
Yeah, she sure has, where Lyon beat Wolfsburg 3-1 to win their 5th straight Champions League title, Jason. It's their 7th overall. She became our first Matilda to win a Champions League medal.
And that's off the back of her winning the French Cup with Lyon a couple of weeks ago. So it's been a super start to her new career at Lyon. And she wasn't the only Matilda to pick up some silverware across the weekend.
Yeah, and Sam Kerr, she picked up some silverware in the Community Shield. As we know, always kicks off the start of the Premier League season. Chelsea beat Man City in the first Women's Community Shield ever played at Wembley.
Yeah, fantastic to see. And, hey, great news next week. We're really excited to bring you an Aussies Abroad World Football, a soccer special. We're going to be joined by our resident expert, Daniel Garb, who we're just absolutely thrilled, Corey, to have on board. He spent many, many years overseas as Fox Sports' European correspondent. If anyone knows anything about Aussies playing football around the world, it's Daniel Garb.
It is. Garby is an absolute ripper. And to have someone like him with his experience of actually being on the ground in Europe, fantastic for us.
He's going to talk us through who is where, doing what with whom. We're going to have a couple of other special footballing guests as well as we preview the new season. So that's something to look out for next week, our Aussies Abroad football special. Time now for Have a Gander At, which is our weekly little segment of something that's just a little bit left field. An Aussie doing something amazing, something special that we just wanted to draw your attention to and link to via our social media if you want to follow up and find out a little bit more. This week's Have a Gander is about an Aussie health software company called Fusion Sport who are doing wonderful things in the COVID space right now. In fact, the NBA season wouldn't be up and running without them. They've designed an app that every NBA player and coach must log into every morning. They have to answer a series of COVID-19 questions. If they get green ticks all the way down the line, they're free to move around inside that NBA bubble and go about their business as per usual. If not, then they can immediately call for medical assistance and make sure they're isolated from the rest of the group. So there's a Bluetooth thermometer as part of this. It feeds info into the app. There's a tool to measure oxygen in the blood. It's fantastic tech. And all this data is fed through their Fusion app. And really important, really smart technology. And as I mentioned, it's allowed the NBA to resume. There's a Forbes magazine article profiling Fusion Sport. Fantastic Aussie company doing great things on the world stage. And if you want to have a gander at it, check it out via our socials. Well, it's time now for our feature interview. And Corey, we're going a little bit left of field. We're still staying in the sporting spectrum, but broadening our footprint a little bit into the world of high performance, elite high performance. And a guy you know very well is Dr. Andy Walsh, who's the Director of High Performance for Red Bull.
Yeah, Andy's fantastic. I had the pleasure of meeting him at Red Bull a number of years ago and did come out in his thongs, Jay. So he is a dinky die Australian.
He's doing amazing things. He works with athletes and artists and scientists and military, people from all ranges of all fields of endeavour around the world. And he works with them just to extract that extra 1% of performance that can make all the difference. Our special guest this week, Dr. Andy Walsh. Well, Dr. Andy Walsh is known as the talent hacker. He works with elite performers in a whole range of industries and sectors right across the world. Andy, welcome to Aussies Abroad. Great to have you.
Likewise, mate. Fantastic to be here.
Now, how did you first get into this line of work? Because it is a very specialist occupation and a pretty unique one.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I was fortunate. I did the classic human performance program in Australia at the old University of Sydney, and part of that when I graduated got connected to the AIS and the institutes, and that sort of just was at the heyday of Australia. Kind of prepping up for the Sydney Games, and there was a lot of really innovative and sharp people working in sports, and I was just lucky to learn off them. And one thing just led to another, and over the years I just managed to sort of keep jumping to new spaces and new communities, and it sort of got me where I am today.
So you did a PhD in applied mechanics rather. So that was the movement side of things. How did you then sort of progress across into the more mental side of performance?
I started, obviously, I figured out when I was sort of studying the PhD that there's just so much more to human factors than the one little very focused area you do in that sort of program. And so what happened was, as I started to get sort of more senior in my roles and I was starting to manage all the different teams and communities of performance specialists like nutritionists, psychologists, engineers, data scientists, et cetera, you name it. I just recognized that you just had to know a little bit about all of it to be able to manage the community to sort of support in a sort of holistic manner. So it was, dive into the psychology world a little, dive into the data science world, dive into the AI world now, and spiritual world, and it just goes on and on. You never stop learning in these jobs,
So what is the essence of talent?
That's a good question. Well, what I can tell you is what we've learned over the years is everybody's got something, everyone's got something to offer. And I think the essence of talent, as we look at it, is it's this idea that everybody is sort of working towards some level of mastery in what they do. And for us, there's a very unique pathway to it. So I'd love to be able to say, hey, there's 3 or 4 things that everybody doesn't have. But I've learned through my career that the best talent, especially the top talent, they've created their own journey, they've created their own path, and sort of as a community, that's all we've done is sit around and listened and watched and learned from all these individuals and teams of how they've done it, and you just start to package that together in terms of just know that they want to get better, they have a deep innate sense of who they are and what they stand for, and then that sort of drives them to be quite humble, and that humility is sort of anchored in this idea that there's always something to learn and some way to improve, and they just keep pushing.
They come from such a broad range of backgrounds too. We're talking athletes, artists, soldiers, government agencies, scientists, creatives, tech gurus, engineers, corporate heavyweights. Yeah. So what's the process then? If someone calls you and says, Andy, I'd like your help, where do you start? Because everybody needs something different, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think from just our background, and I think about everything we've learned is sort of collectively, or I reflect upon, is the community's talent. So all the people that we've grown to know over the years who are in sort of performance support roles, that's the first secret to all this. There's just hundreds of people globally connected to our sort of, that's what we call the Liminal Collective. And that group is really experts in their own right around how to support talent. So you sort of aggregate all that talent on individuals or teams or projects. But the process really is quite simple. You sit down and you just say, look, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? Where do you want to go? What's getting in your way? And when you think about it, the top talents, especially the very best, they know what's sort of challenging for them. They know the first few things that they want to really focus on. So people say, God, you guys did it. And we're like, no, it's actually the people telling us what they need. And then with all that deep collective wisdom that sits in the community around us, we go, well, maybe what you need, and we start to just form this partnership with them, and that becomes their unique, bespoke way forward. And in many cases, well, you may want to try doing this, but we've seen that fail 100 times, and maybe try something else. And that's how the community sort of supports each other and then supports the individuals or teams in their process. So pretty straightforward, really. But there's a lot of wisdom in the community that helps make it actionable.
How do you teach people how to learn?
If someone, pick the top talents in the world that may come to you, there's no shot in hell we could look down and say, hey, we can make you better. That'd be the most stupid and arrogant and, thing we could actually say. But what we can do is say, all right, you are facing certain challenges that you're telling us. We've seen that happen in similar patterns with other high performers and usually in different communities. And many times we just connect the dots and bring that to life because, again, they're not really going to listen to people like us, but they'll listen to other world-class performers who are pushing an edge and struggling in a similar way. And usually it's a matter, in the true sense of the Aussie model is you get them together, 4 or 5, you throw a case of beer at them and let them talk, and they love it. They figure stuff out. And then, we sit on the edges and take some notes and obviously help facilitate, but that's the essence of it, And I wouldn't say you teach them to learn. The humility in that, they're not humble. Like they can be very proud of what they've achieved, but there's that innate humility as we define it, where they know that if they don't stay on top of their game and think about what's next and keep pushing, that someone else will come around and sort of take that title. And so there's that humility reflected in a deep sense of continuous learning. And so again, they usually have that. That's why they're so good.
And Andy, you've worked with such a vast array of different people, from San Antonio Spurs, you've got esports, Atlanta Falcons, entrepreneurs, baseball. But one that, if you could just break it down, like a particular case study that I've really loved and enjoyed, is Australia's own Robbie Madison with the challenge of breaking down New Year's Eve. So do you want to give everyone a bit of an insight of how that first evolved, and then, how you broke down the task?
It's a great example. Again, to what I'm saying, sort of this general theme is the talent knows what's possible, especially when Maddo came with this idea of wanting to jump, up on the Arc de Triomphe in Vegas and that whole idea. So there's no shot in hell any group of marketing or sports performance people could actually come up with that event, because we're not as deep in the sport as he was. And so he knows that, given his level of talent and what the sport's doing, that this next step looks like this. So he's the one who comes up with the idea. And I think I'm trying to recall back a few years now, but I think Maddo told me he was driving through Vegas and saw the thing. There's no reason why I can't jump on top of that, where most humans would not think that when they went past it. And then, he came to the brand and he said, look, I want to do this. I want to do it in a certain way. And again, there's these deep experts that we have in, motorsports and engineering and the whole package. And so once he sort of talks about the process, he outlines the sort of deliberate approach of setting up a practice venue that he can go to 24/7. It's going to need to be up for several months. Big facility we had to construct out in the bush here outside of LA. And he comes in and he starts off, and we built a massive foam pit the size of, a couple of, suburban households. And he just starts practicing at lower levels and smaller levels. He starts tuning his bike up, and, it's just that natural progression of a talent and lots of feedback in the system. And he just got better and better and better. And of course, he could make mistakes. He could push hard. He could make a mistake and go long, and be safe because he'd land in the pit, etc. And so what happens in that natural development is, Corey, better than anyone, that they get to a point where they start just giving you the guidance as to how much they want to move and how much bigger and harder they want to go. And once he got to the level of the practice, with the whole structure matched the structure that was sitting in Vegas. So there's a scaffold version of the Arc de Triomphe that sits in Vegas, built out here in the bush. And he practices and practices and practices. So, I know the public gets this idea that Maddo turns up and just goes for it. But, like anything, there's a lot of deliberate, purposeful practice and feedback to get him there.
But with that also, you've been focused on a broader goal of demystifying talent. With that, from what you've just explained, then is that also a huge part of it, of just breaking down the task into very simple forms, like you said with Robbie Madison?
Yeah, what we've learned, I think, over the years is, and something that was a big wake up for us, especially when I moved first to the action sports community in the role I had at Red Bull, was these staggering talents like Maddo and everybody else pushing the edge of what's really possible. And in many cases, in those particular fields of play, in those sports, you make a mistake and you're very hurt or you're dead. Many cases you die. But they never had coaches, they never had trainers, they never had nutritionists and psychologists. They were just doing it. And it sort of was a big wake up, because I'd come from a very scientific background and lots of structure and professional sports where it's all pretty regimented. And I recognized then that we'd kind of lost sight a little bit of the idea of getting the environment right. If you get that actual environment that they're playing in or practicing in right, and the environment gives you the feedback, then you don't actually have to be so prescriptive. And the simple things like, progression, repetition, good solid feedback, the motivation obviously to do it. And then finally, obviously, he's got to be able to make mistakes. And that community celebrates mistakes. You watch a skateboarder fall or someone crash on a wave, Maddo, to a certain level, they get up, they laugh, people cheer. And so some of the things we actually took from that community in terms of the first question is, you drag that idea back to professional sports. And when was the last time you saw AFL team have an afternoon where the guys were just let to play, screw around, just have fun. And you see what we see in those moments when you really let the top talent play. They do stuff that you wouldn't have imagined. And it's staggering. A few years ago, I was lucky to sit at the Beijing Olympics and watching practice of the American Dream Team, the basketball team. And before Coach Mike came out, it was just them, playing around, screwing off, and holy hell, it was like something out of a movie. Balls, and I was just like, wow. All they need to do is just go out and have fun, but obviously the rules and everything. So anyway, I hope that answers your question in a long-rounded way.
Yeah, the action sports guys are a totally different breed, aren't they? They laugh, they cheer, they take each other to hospital.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get me wrong, it's not for the faint of heart. And I think, but also, that's that idea of what can you learn from every community. When you watch the action sport group and they're playing and yahooing and running to the hospital, let's be fair. But the idea that, why don't we take some of that over here? And then, funnily enough, at Red Bull, we actually brought a little of the discipline and process into some of the action sports as the progressions got higher and things started to get a little bit more dangerous. And that's that idea of knowledge transfer amongst the sort of performance communities. But then when it gets really exciting is when you start to throw in artists and musicians and esports and creators and did a program with a bunch of hackers, and then you start to mix it all up. It just self-perpetuates. And again, you stand back and, quietly watch and learn.
Yeah, the action sports guys, particularly those X Games guys, I got to spend a lot of time with them at Aussies Abroad over the years. And you're right, it's a bizarre dynamic, isn't it? Because they're actually competing against each other to win the gold medal at X Games. But they all train together, they practice together, they assist each other to get better at their tricks. They're all in a big, Robbie Madison's entire front yard, Corey, is a huge motocross track with all these jumps and everything. He's got a big bulldozer in the front end loader, and he sets up these tracks, and they all sort of live in the same area, and they all come and train together. And it's fascinating, Andy, isn't it? Because these are also the guys that they're directly competing against, but every day they spend time together working on their tricks, helping each other. Hey, what if you did that? And what if you came off there and you tried this? And so they're actually making each other better at the same time, but then have to go and compete against each other. It's a really fascinating dynamic, unlike most in sport.
Yeah, he's exactly right. And, and Matt, and again, he's an extraordinary talent in his own right. And you give him a little competition, a few mates, some ideation, some creativity, which is probably our number one focus in sport nowadays. And then they sort of leave all that, they leave the field of play behind. They play, they explore, they push the edge. But then when it comes down to game day, they definitely put the sort of friendship aside and compete hard, and they compete against each other hard. And I think that's, again, just one community that there was, especially in the 2000s, there was so much progression and acceleration of what they were doing that it was a really vibrant time to learn from them. And, I took lots of great lessons from those individuals.
So I think for us, Corey, it's easy to grasp how you can work with an individual. You can sit down with an individual one-on-one and say, what do you need? What are your challenges? How can we build a team? But Corey, you've been in a team experience for most of your life. How do you see that process working in a team environment? And I'll be fascinated to hear from Andy in a moment as to how he goes about it and whether there's a difference in the process.
Yeah, I think team environments, it still comes down to how you're going to work together and how you push one another. I think that's what actually makes the really great sports teams out there around the world. That's I think separates the organisations like the Patriots. And yes, you've got this individual flair, but you've also got to operate within the team constraints as well. So, and that's what I think. In a team environment, when you've got a really good one, you drive one another.
So how does your process differ, Andy, or is it basically the same? Do you work with the individuals within the team, or do you work with the team as a collective, or a combination of both?
Both, and all the way up to bigger structures and organisations. So, but the principles for us are really, First principles for us is always who are you? What are you about as an individual? And you'll hear, teams around the world talk about they have a certain value set and character set and principles that they follow. But if you're not sort of first pretty self-aware as an individual, you're going to really struggle in a team environment. I think Corey will double down on this. You know, you can be the sharpest, best, whatever it is in the world. If you are, you know, kind of the no dickhead rule, if you go into a team environment, you can't engage, you can't share, you can't be as equally, if not more, invested in their success as individuals and the team as a success, you know, then you're just going to fail. And we've seen it over and over again. Individual talent of average capability coming together in a high-performing team environment, crushing a team of individual high performers, like destroying them over and over and over again. And that's how our process is always you first. You know, great teams are made up of great individuals. Focus on the individual and helping them understand and improving and pushing their individual capabilities, both physically, cognitively, you know, etc. But then the team dynamic, you then start to create scenarios, and as Corey said, you're pushing, you know, you're stretching them in ways that forces sort of things to start to crack a little, and then you start to debrief and unpack them, and it's all about communication, shared set of values, and really anchoring in, you know, on team first and you second, and that basic premise. And then when you get to larger groups, you're really starting to talk about big picture, legacy, ethos. What, you know, why am I here? What am I doing this for? And, you know, to our point of, you know, demystifying talents, is how do you make the whole world better at what they want to become better at, and then, you know, let the cream rise to the top.
So for an organisation like the Spurs or the Cleveland Indians or the Atlanta Falcons, is most of that work done out of season or in season? And I guess the brief can be different depending on what they tell you that they need. But what sort of time frame are we talking about working with these sort of organisations to get something done?
We've been really fortunate over the years, and again, very much. There's some teams that just are successful because they can just afford top talent, and they just churn, and they buy their way into these, you know, into these championships, and that's a model. I think it's not a very sustainable model, but things like the Spurs and R.C. Buford and Pop, you know, Greg Popovich, way before I had any engagement, they were already right at the top of their game. And fundamentally because of the culture and the way that organisation manages itself and holds its individuals accountable for a higher purpose. We may come in with some technologies and things like that, but once they have that culture, as again, Corey spoke to, the idea that you're then just trying to help maybe advance in other areas where they don't have depth and things. And like with any organisation, it takes a couple of years to really get to know the players and the people and their value set, and to make sure you're a fit. I mean, that, as much as you think you may help them, they also have to understand what you bring to the table, and you know, so a big part of that is kicking each other's tires for a while.
You've dealt with literally thousands of successful people in fields all around the world. Is there a set of fundamental tenets and characteristics that successful people have?
I think what we typically see is character in its own right. Character in its own right is probably one of the most critical components of the top performing organizations, teams, individuals. And in fact, the top performing communities that we get to work with in the most serious and high performing environments, they select purely on character. They don't, the fundamental, you can teach people pretty much anything, you know, give or take, but if they have the basic skill set, but one of the basic premises is if you have the humility, the compassion, the empathy, the courage, the wisdom, the ability to be coached, you can learn to be great at all these other things. And if you can put yourself and select for that, you're in great shape. So I think with all the science and tech that's been brought in over the years, which I've obviously been deeply involved with and still am, there's a staggering opportunity now to unpack talent and sort of peel the layers back. But it's the stuff you can't measure that is the most critical. And I think given where we are with, you know, some of the advanced stuff in machine learning and AI, et cetera, humans being better at being human is really the path forward. And the top performing communities over the years have known that, but now the emphasis is even more on that sort of element.
Corey, let me ask you this question. Would you rather play with a bloke who is a phenomenal talent and you know can win you a game at any time, but he's not great for the team dynamic, or a bloke who's solid performer but a great team man? Which one would you prefer?
Yeah, there's no simple answer, Chase, but I think Look, I think anyone that, can bring a great dynamic to a team, you can never replace that. I think someone that's, they're a solid performer, but when, they bring that extra bit to the table, that they're great for the group, they're great to be around. They're enthusiastic at training. It's all the stuff that Andy's saying. It's all that, the old-fashioned stuff of, enthusiasm and what they bring. I think you can't beat that.
Which do you get more satisfaction out of working with, Andy? Taking the guy who's the rare, or the girl who's the rare, precocious talent and trying to knock the rough edges off them, or helping the person who's a battler or, solid to maybe slightly above average to get the best out of themselves? Which brings you more satisfaction?
I love it all because both, as Corey said, both are unique challenges. We used to, very often still say, talent can be a curse. And talent can be a curse, especially if they come to you at a later stage in their career when they've had a junior program and they've been best in class and they've been great at Worlds and whatever it is. And at some point they're going to get beaten. They're going to get slapped down. And I think what happens at that point is if they don't have those skills that they should have developed, being sort of struggling along the way, it's really a challenge to bring those sort of understanding and awareness and skill set to them. So in that light, you kind of see the super talent sometimes sort of have this awakening and this, oh my God, I have been kind of not a great person and I'm now super talented and I start to really stand for something beyond myself. And that's fantastic to observe. But there's nothing like, I must say, when you have someone who's just work hard, the battler, puts in the hours, puts in the effort, and typically they don't get all the publicity and press and money that the super talents get. But when they win, and what's really wonderful about most of those individuals is they come to you afterwards, and they're all about everybody in the community that helped them. Couldn't have got there without you. They share the love, and so there's something really staggering to see someone who's just put the effort in to get to that level. So very different dynamics, but both are rewarding. But if a lot of talent on one team, so as an example, that can be a nightmare. I prefer a group of battlers, and then we try and be the underdog and crack it. That's always probably for me the most exciting.
Leonardo da Vinci once said that people of accomplishment really sat back and let things happen to them. They went out and happened to things. How much of elite performance is actually about control and either having it or letting it go?
I think the control, the sort of the cliche in our world is, you got to let go of everything you can't actually control. You have to have that mindset of, all right, rain, hail, snow, whatever it may be, weather, something untoward happening on grand final day. All that stuff I push away and I focus on what I can control, which is myself and how I respond in any situation. And I think, that sort of idea that they let the world come to them a little bit better is definitely something I've seen the great talents do. They definitely are pushing the edges of their craft. They're out there trying and definitely, but when it comes down to it, they have that capability and that sense of self-awareness and understanding that they let the things happen and pass to them versus chasing it on the moment and not getting distracted.
Corey and I have had discussions about this before, and how much of elite performance is about the mental side as opposed to the physical side. It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because when you get to a certain level, let's say AFL football or the NBA, whatever it is, everyone's got talent to get there, yet some manage to get more out of themselves than others. It's really interesting.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, my basic premise on that, because the question gets asked a lot, is you actually can't separate the two because the physical and cognitive, it's all one system. But I think the dynamic is, and fundamentally, a default is we know a lot less about the cognitive side because the brain is so intrinsically complex that if you can't explain it physically, people just default, mentally, he wasn't there. You hear that, didn't have his or her game face on, and you're like, yeah, of course, but maybe they just, something else was going on. And I think on the cognitive side or the mental side, why we always default back to characters, I think those are that sort of character, innate ability to sort of persevere, push through, suffer the highs and lows, celebrate the wins, but also, reflect positively and the learning style on the crushing defeats. That sort of character measure, which is heavily cognitive, that sort of stuff starts to become what you see the teams that sort of excel. So,
Andy, the human performance, elite human performance space has evolved so much in the last 20 years. How much of that has been driven by technology and science, and how much of it is still based around old-fashioned human connection and relationships and emotions?
I think the ultimate performance is what happens in the field of play or in the boardroom, on the stage. I think that ultimately is a very human and very emotional experience. So what's interesting now, you have this blend of staggering tech that's unpacking the individual, the human, and in ways we've never imagined. So we're learning more and more about it. Many cases, it's just reinforcing what we've kind of known in our guts for centuries, thousands of years. But at the same time, we are starting to see these insights into things that are just like, wow, we couldn't believe that. That's what's happening. But funnily enough, when even you look at that problem right now, the biggest issue with it is trust. In a human team, trust is a classic challenge that people have to overcome to really perform at a high level. In the human machine system, it's the same. It's, do you trust the machine? Is it, you don't want to default to it always being right, because it may make a mistake, but you've also got to know you've got to have that level of trust between yourself and it, so you know when to use the information it's providing. Just take the, autopilot on a plane. If you look at all the literature on sort of accident review in aircraft, most of the issues are humans where they didn't listen to the machine. The machine is, I know even this week, my old colleagues here at DARPA, they had the machine, the advanced machine flying the plane, and they had one of the top US pilots flying the plane. They put them in air-to-air combat. And can you guess the outcome?
It wasn't Maverick.
It wasn't Maverick. No, it wasn't Maverick. But, the machine, 5-zip. The human can't touch the machine. So that reference is, in some ways, just illustrates that some machines can do some things better than humans. And when do you trust them? But when do you? But if you listen to the data all the time and follow it blindly, to your point, it might send you down a path that maybe is correct right now, but ultimately it can't see the next step. Or, as we say, it can't see around corners. The challenge nowadays is most other teams have all that data as well. So the only way to sort of figure out how to break it is to do something the other team doesn't expect. Don't play to your pattern, play to something unique. And that's where we get into the conversations around creativity and why that is so critically important nowadays in any training environment, no matter who you are. And back to the earlier conversation, and that's why play is the essence of that model is so important, but it's really rare. In fact, just an anecdote, we take a team out, a professional sports team, and you put them there and they're all turned up for practice and they're ready to start the drills. You say, no, girls and guys, it's up to you today. They stand around for the first 10 minutes trying to figure out what to do. So it's an interesting space they've ended up until, and it takes one character in there to start booting the ball around, whatever it is, and then they start to play. So interesting times.
For you and your peers, there's actually a bigger picture in all this too, isn't it? If you can unlock the brightest minds of today and get them to think better and think more creatively and come up with better solutions, we could actually end up with a better world tomorrow. And I know you've mentioned briefly the Liminal Collective, which is a human performance advisory that you're a part of, that states its mission is to create humanity 2.0. What does that mean?
Talking a top athlete to the top of the podium, with respect to their ability to handle pressure, and training them for that is exactly the same thing that the 9-year-old girl may need for that very first piano recital she does in front of her schoolmates, or the young fella, the young doctor or surgeon going in for that first major, operation that he or she's in charge of. That idea of democratizing all that information is how we then think, globally lift everybody up. And then specifically working with communities where we take a group of climate scientists and giving them the same human factors program that a top group of athletes would have. Put all the tools around them to be the best they can actually be and perform at their highest level, so that they have a greater chance of cracking, our global issues. And so we've spent time in the last 10 years or so testing out how to help support those communities solving big problems. And, and it's great because fundamentally, as you guess it works. It's just that, there's no entertainment value in, training a group of heart surgeons unless you're the poor sucker on the table.
Philosophically, is human potential limitless?
Oh, is human potential limitless? I think we're entering this era, which sort of answers your question, of what we call the evolution of evolution. Having watched that trajectory over the last 250,000 years, if you sort of look back at where the modern humanoid came from, I think there's so much more potential. And I think it's, in many cases, it is limitless, because if you throw it far enough ahead, there will be this new form of human, machine, symbiosis. We will just keep evolving. But one of our hopes is that we're hopefully very focused on the human side, so we get to things like extreme compassion, extreme courage, extreme wisdom, extreme creativity.
There's always the moral and ethical questions associated with high performance in sport. Lots of factors in that, Andy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the obvious ones is the sort of, when does something go from an optimization to an augmentation? That's how we delineate. So, drugs, the easiest one to talk about, that people are familiar with. I love that sport, and I love the rigor in trying to keep sport very pure and very, very, very much human against human. And I think for me in sport, there's very clear guidelines. Obviously, we're always going to push around edges and look for gaps, but there's definitely cheating and not cheating. I think those guidelines for me are pretty black and white. Now, do you bend the rules and push on things where you think you're having a competitive advantage, maybe in the design of the clothing and that? Yeah, obviously. But I think there's a creative and ethical way to do that versus, hey, blatantly just flat out cheating.
What about elite junior development, Andy? When does enough become too much when it comes to grooming champions, which in so many sports now is the way of the world?
Yeah, for me, I'm pretty dogmatic on this one. I think that kids are just getting crushed now. I don't believe in it. And my experience has been, I've had so many young junior world champions and top talents at 12, 13, 14, and very few of them make it through. And I think, but the ones that do are the case studies that all the aspiring parents follow and then push their kids into this other space. I think the plethora of injuries we see, I think the rigor, the travel, the whole pressure you're laying on in junior sport, it's not necessary. I'm a big believer in the multi-sport, faceted development of a young individual. And I think in particular, the character development of young talent is a thing that not many programs do well. I think that's the biggest loss, because I think, the technical side we get, and you just do more laps, more training, more lifting, more whatever, more skills. But how are you thinking as a coach of that character piece? And that, to me, should be 90% and 10% on the skills. And then, to me, make it play, make it fun.
Have you seen it from firsthand that because kids nowadays have actually got more access to their devices and technology, that the skills, they should be getting better, but in actual fact, they're not, because of this access to technology, more importantly, their phones?
There's definitely a tendency, given the dominance of the screen, to lose yourself in, I can learn everything on this thing and I just can't get out, versus getting out and feeling it, touching it, and handling it. And I think we're seeing the depression rates. I'm sure Australia following suit, but in the US, and young people tied to screen issues and what's happening on the screen, to be more clear, through the roof. Anxiety, depression, suicide rates just skyrocketing. I think that stuff in its own right is detracting from the opportunity to learn and have a great little device that helps you. And I think, again, if we think about what's that ideal training environment for a young person, you got to keep them engaged, and you have to use some cool tech, and you got to use the visuals, because that's their world. That's how they're digital natives. but at the same time, dragging them out and giving them a little taste of all the other stuff and blending that in a really creative way, I think is really a sweet spot. And I think we default, even in our case, we default to a lot of video review and things like that. And, you know, as you know better than anyone, Corey, sometimes you just got to feel it and taste it, you know, and that part is, that's the balance. And there's a lot of research coming out now about how critical natural environments and nature is in terms of cognitive growth and development. And even for us, resetting ourselves, so getting away and just getting in nature to reset. And I think all that's starting to swing around and become more prominent.
When I was growing up through junior sport, and you would have been the same, it was, you know, winning's not everything, it's the only thing. Win, win, win. It's win at all costs. But over time, that's sort of starting to give way now to a more holistic approach from coaches, less ranting and raving and yelling and more caring, softer approach.
No, I think you're definitely seeing, I think it swung one way for a while where it was everybody gets a medal sort of thing. And I think that time has been sort of past. I think now that, I think people are struggling to find that balance. I think there's definitely this, how do I develop that drive and passion and energy and determination and perseverance to see it through. At the same time, in terms of inclusivity and everything else, how do I bring that experience to more people and allow more people to participate and play outside of the competitive environment? And I think I don't have a good solution, and I think it's a challenge that, you know, to play in the NBA over here, you got a way more chance of winning the lottery than ever actually playing in the NBA. In fact, I think the comparison's not even close. So what's fair to the youth, you know, without deflating dreams but also be realistic in setting expectations for them. And I've actually seen some big time junior programs where they get sort of their mid-tier their talent together. The head coach from the A-level team or the first team come in and say, only one out of this few hundred of you is going to make it, so just don't get your hopes up. So I've actually seen coaches deliver that speech. I don't know to what effect and what end, but that's pure realism, but probably crushes a lot of dreams. But then having everyone, you're all going to make it, that's not fair either. So because then you get parents trying to push and push and push, and the kid's just never going to get there. Don't have a good answer for you, but it's a tough one.
Most of us have a desire to do better and be better in our daily lives. What 3 tips could you leave us with to improve our own performance, whatever our field of endeavour might be?
Oh, wow. I would say, firstly, figure out where it is you were trying to go and what's that bigger purpose and vision. I think one of the things we saw for years when we looked at really top talent is typically there's something beyond themselves. There's a bigger purpose. It may be their family, teammates, country, whatever they're trying to do, even though they are doing it ultimately to improve on what they're doing. But there's sometimes that bigger motivation. That helps a lot if you can find that for you. I think the idea of, you know, you've got to, if everybody I've ever met wants to improve at something, so figuring out what that thing is that you're trying to sharpen, and then in that context, just going and sharing and opening up your inputs in terms of who can I learn from, being humble in your approaching. Okay, I can obviously, if I want to be a great tennis player, I can be a great tennis player and follow other tennis, but what can I learn about myself in terms of the game of tennis, which is all the other elements, cognition, nutrition, purpose, blah, 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 fitness. Where can I pick from other communities and sort of pick apart? I think that sort of really is that multidisciplinary approach to understanding your own trajectory. And the third thing, which anchors on the second thing, is don't follow anybody else. Carve your own path. Like, take all those inputs, look at all the models, look at all the mistakes that have been made, but then figure out what works for you. And in that context, be kind to yourself about it. If you're going to push yourself to that next level and whatever it is you choose, if you're doing it right, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and just recognize that those mistakes are actually a huge opportunity for growth and learning, and don't be harsh on yourself that you may not get it the first 10th, 1,000th time. But that, I see a lot of people self sort of sabotage because they take it all too personally. I don't know if that helps, but that's a couple of things.
That was fantastic advice. When was the last time you were in Australia, and do you get homesick still?
So there are definitely moments when I miss the place. I absolutely miss the people and the culture, the idea that, things aren't as serious as they can appear when you're over here, especially in the US right now. So for me, that's that sort of draws me back.
Yeah, Andy, I know that you have your trusty thongs, because when I met you at Red Bull, Andy lobbed out in the foyer. I knew that I was really dealing with a dinky-die Australian when he lobbed out and had the thongs on. I thought he's my type of man. But what little piece of Australia do you keep with you to remind you of Australia?
What little piece of Australia do I keep with me? Well, there's a few things. I actually, in our main home, in our home, right in the living room, there's an old picture of Lennox Point, like taken in the 50s, and it's black and white. And that little thing, every time I look up there, I'm like, oh my God, that sort of image just captures to me that sort of magical East Coast, Sydney, the old road trips that we used to take up north, and just hit all those beautiful locations. So that piece I keep with me here as a reminder of, those great times, great mates, and great places,
And if a care package was to arrive on your doorstep right now, your doorbell was to ring, and there were 3 things from Australia that could be in it, what would be in that care package?
Oh, well, I've been out with some of our mates. It would be Barocas, number 1. So this. What do I miss a lot about home? Oh God, a meat pie. I tell you, you cannot get a meat pie anywhere in this country. And so what else? And I literally still order Vegemite and have it delivered here. And it costs you don't want to know what you pay for a jar of Vegemite over here. But if it had those 3 things in, I'd be pretty set. If I could get a schooner of a good Aussie beer as well, that wouldn't hurt.
Following on from the idea of having an Aussie schooner, if you could put on a keg and have a dream Aussie barbecue and have any 3 Aussies, past or present, living or dead, come around to your place, who would you invite?
I would think, from a professional side, just growing up and watching the rugby. I think I'd love to have the Ella brothers. I just watching how they played rugby, and I got to see them a little bit of Randwick, and I always wondered what that whole journey was like for them. I think that'd be fantastic. Growing up watching and diving deep into, from an artistic perspective, any of the top Aussie performers, classic ones of the Barnesies of the world, or that type of thing. I think any musician that sort of note in Australia, I'd love to have a good yarn with. And then digging a little deeper, past. If I could really go, I've always been fascinated by the sort of notion of what and as a human performance expert, what we've forgotten about, what it takes to be sort of at the top of your game. And I think the top of your game from the most of human history has been survival. I would love to go back and, invite, spend time if I could, or have them spend time with us at a barbie. Some of the First Nations, some of the original owners of the Australian culture, and just learn how they did and what they were thinking and how they interpreted the world, because I think there's so much just from a pure professional perspective, what we could learn from them to help us today.
And Andy, what advice would you have for Aussies thinking about making the plunge and heading overseas to chase their dreams? Like, what would be some of the advice from your end that you give to many Aussies thinking about and doing that?
Advice. I think for Aussies, there's this little bit of again, personal reflection of this sort of, there's a bit of a sense that, that there's this take coming to the US as one example, that, it's a little daunting and a little overwhelming. And I think just back yourself, just don't be worried about, the perception of what you think you're stepping into, because on the ground, the reality is it's probably far more similar to what you're used to than different. And that's obviously in the North American piece. I think just going, taking that first step and having the confidence to have a go, because I think once you get here, you find that there's so many unique things that you can contribute to and learn from and grow from, and just be patient and definitely, if I reflect on my own experience, the first few months, it's going to be brutal. You're going to be, what the hell have I done? I've left what I knew and everybody I was loved and connected to, and I've come over here, especially as I did by myself. It's like, I remember sitting in a subway of all places over here going, my God, in Park City, this was the biggest mistake I ever made. And then as I just relaxed and let the world come to us, opportunities abound. And then that can launch you into careers and places you never imagined. And as much as I loved everything I had and the life I was living and everything I had back home, the things I've seen and experienced because I took that step and dug in for a little bit have been completely extraordinary. And we wouldn't be having this conversation had we not. So that it's as simple as that.
Andy, thanks so much for your time. It's been fascinating to have a chat. And part of this Aussies Abroad project that Corey and I have set up is about building a support network for Aussies around the globe. So it's been wonderful to be able to tap into your expertise. Congratulations on all your success so far and all the people that you've helped along the way. Thanks so much for your time here on Aussies Abroad.
Thank you, guys. And I'm an open book over here. If, people are actually coming through, I'm always happy to help an Aussie trying to figure out a way over here. So thanks for what you're doing, and please let people know. Happy to help out if I can.
What a fascinating man, Dr. Andy Walsh, just one of thousands of Australians who've got really cool jobs around the world. Well, that's it for this week. Looking ahead to next week's show, we're going to have a World Football special. We're going to be joined by our Aussies Abroad football correspondent, Daniel Garb, to talk Aussies in soccer all over the globe, plus a couple of other very special guests coming your way as well. Matty Keenan will join us to talk Tour de France, and we'll have all the latest news from Aussies around the world. Before we go, Corey, where can people find us?
Yep, go to aussiesabroad.tv. It has all the links to YouTube, the podcast, and all the social media.
Yep, Aussies Abroad TV, our online home for Aussies Abroad. Thanks for your company this week. Good luck to all our Aussies competing around the globe. And we'll catch you next week on Aussies Abroad.